All right, guys, let's do a fantasy check-in now on the Denver Nuggets. We're looking at trade deadline type scenarios for this team and whether this team, some trades could come and shake things up. Now, their starting core, I think, is pretty intact. Whether that is Torrey Craig or Will Barton starting at small forward doesn't matter. It's Gary Harris, it's Jamal Murray, it's Barton, it's Millsap, and it's Nikola Jokic, of course. And then you've got some strong bench options. But it is going to get a little bit tight here with Barton and Harris ramping their minutes back up and Isaiah Thomas eventually returning around the All-Star break. What happens here with guys like Thomas, with guys like Malik Beasley, who's played really well, with guys like Monty Morris, with guys like Trey Lyles? Could they look to consolidate some of these players and make a move? I think that's probably the most likely scenario if they do happen to make a trade, is they've just got too many bodies. And while that might seem great from a depth perspective, but trying to fit all that stuff in and get these guys minutes without them having an issue. And one of the strengths of this Denver team has been their willingness to be, solid as a team, to care for each other, to have great chemistry, and we've heard that espoused plenty of times from this squad. And introducing a guy like Isaiah Thomas to that mix, does that cause a problem if he's not playing, or if he's coming in and playing and jacking shots and being terrible and taking shots away from other guys? There's a real concern there. So I think the problem we're going to have is he's probably not going to play before the All-Star break, so that leaves a real question mark as to what happens with this team. So overall, if I had to guess, I say that they're not really involved in any sort of trades. But if one move was going to be made, it would be Isaiah Thomas. Whether that is just straight out releasing him or trying to trade him back for a second round pick or something along those lines. But that core, the guys who provide that fantasy value for the Denver Nuggets, I don't really see too much changing. Someone like Malik Beasley, who's been playing really well at the moment, he's going to suffer a drop off. He's averaging, he's the 54th ranked player over the last 2 weeks, shooting 60% from the field. And those two numbers, including 58% from three, those three numbers have absolutely zero chance of being able to sustain as Harris and Barton both increase their minutes, and then as Beasley comes back to earth, because he is not, of course, the greatest shooter in NBA history, which is what those numbers would lead you to believe. Let's look at the Detroit Pistons now. Fantasy check-in at trade deadline, sort of a chat on them. Are they likely to make a move? I think they're at a higher chance of making a move than, say, what the Nuggets are. The guy you'd look to there, I think, is Stanley Johnson, who was starting to begin the season but has moved to the bench and has continued to struggle. Again, not shooting the ball well, not doing really what he needs to do. Is that going to have an impact on how this team looks? Probably not. But the way that they're currently going in terms of their starters, you got the Shark Bruce Brown starting alongside Reggie Bullock on the wing, Reggie Jackson in the backcourt, Blake Griffin and Andre Drummond. Griffin and Drummond I don't think are going anywhere. Jackson, I think they would love to get rid of Reggie Jackson, so he is a possibility. Where he goes, I don't think it really matters if he does get traded. I don't think it makes any difference at all as to what his fantasy value is. He is still that fringe 12-team league guy, as I talked about with the waiver wire, also with the buy low, sell high type of stuff. I don't think that changes too much for him, but of course it would open up an opportunity, and I would assume they would look to get a point guard back in return there. The other moves that could happen, maybe it is Bullock, who is an unrestricted free agent, who's on a really, really nice contract, $2.5 million this season. If they move on from him, then a guy like Luke Kennard, who Casey's showing a little bit more trust in of late, still not fully there. Maybe Kennard can move into that starting lineup and be a fantasy viable player over the post-trade deadline period of the season. That's probably the only other thing I can see happening. If Stan Johnson's gone, I don't think that really does anything to change value. Maybe it helps someone like Kyrie Thomas a little bit for deeper leagues, and it boosts a little bit of the value for Kennard. But Johnson's been playing most of his minutes as a power forward this season. So is that more Glenn Robinson minutes? Is it Henry Allenson getting into the mix? It's not likely to be an impact scenario. But Bullock and Jackson, the two Reggies, they'd be names just to pay attention to, because again, Bullock could be a really, really useful piece for a contender, and the Pistons might be able to get something of an asset back in exchange for him. All right, trade deadline fantasy check-in for the Golden State Warriors. I can't see it for them. Steph, KD, DeMarcus, Draymond, Clay, they're not going anywhere, and that is where all of the fantasy value gets siphoned up with this team. A couple of guys who are expiring deals: Eunice Jerebko, Kevon Looney, then you got Jordan Bell, who's a restricted free agent. Guys like, Looney's obviously a key part of their rotation. Bell, there's obviously some distrust and disharmony with him and Steve Kerr at times. They claim to have fixed that situation, but they're not going to trade him. We didn't see them trade Pat McCall last season. He's a restricted free agent. We're going to have, I think, more issues with that heading into next season. I just don't see any sort of deal on the horizon for this Warriors team whatsoever, and definitely not one that's going to have any sort of impact for fantasy at all. Just have a quick chat on what DeMarcus Cousins can be. I think probably his best case scenario for this season is top 25. I worry a little bit how the efficiency goes. That's something that does bother players as they come back from serious injuries like ACLs and Achilles injuries. So that's probably something that can keep him down, but I'm much more optimistic on what his minutes loaded is going to be in March. I thought that he'd be still playing 25 minutes a night. I think he's going to be at 30 minutes a night by March, and that's going to push him into that top 30, maybe top 25, top 20 type discussions. But I do worry about maybe the maybe not the block numbers, but more the field goal percentage numbers for DeMarcus Cousins. All right, let's take a look at the Houston Rockets. Any trade deadline action coming with this team? I'd be pretty skeptical, although we know Daryl Morey loves a deal. They're the team that benefits more from waiver wire, also buyout type scenarios. They've already got Austin Rivers and Kenneth Faried this season. They've made 2 trades to clear money away, which makes me a little bit cautious about the moves they're going to make. Michael Carter-Williams and Carmelo Anthony have both been traded away for nothing in return to get off money. There is a chance, I think, with Eric Gordon, though, if there was anyone on this team that was going to be dealt, it would be him in a package of some other guys, some other type assets to maybe get a bigger name. So that would be one to watch. And Gordon's that player that we know that when he's playing second offensive banana to James Harden or Chris Paul, then he is a 12-team-like player. When he plays alongside Chris Paul and James Harden, he's not a 12-team guy. So a trade for him could open up a lot more consistency in his role and keep him as that consistent top 100 guy rather than being, hey, I'm a top 60 guy now while someone's out, and then I'm a top 140 guy when everyone's healthy. So he's a name to watch, and obviously with Paul out at the moment, and to a lesser extent Capella, Gordon's a guy that you have to roster. And given the fact that Paul will likely be back before the trade deadline, and that could have a dent in Gordon's value, I think there is a decent chance that if a big deal is going to go down, the Rockets would like to get involved in it, and Gordon would be the piece that they would like to include in that. Would be my thought on that. Again, it seems unlikely that is going to be the case, but that would be the scenario. So I think having him now and just holding through that trade deadline, even when Paul comes back, is probably worth doing just to see if anything does actually go down with Eric Gordon.